It's time for us to check back in with Louisa in Mountain Path and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, you can look in the description below for a playlist. Samantha T. came to school again one day not long after the new year. She slipped through the door during early noon recess while the other children were all away, for no matter what the weather might be, Ryan P. went home at noon. Sometimes if the school were small, as on that day, they took all its members home with them, where they were welcomed by Corey to pickles and fodder beans or cow peas and cornbread. A light snow was falling, and Samantha T., her head bare and her body wrapped in an old jumper, shivered soundlessly by Louisa's roaring fire. Beyond a cordial, "I was hoping you'd come again, Samantha T." The teacher said nothing, patient to wait until the girl saw fit to say something, hoping meanwhile that it might not be a tale of trouble to come. When she had stood warming herself a little, she shook her fingers through her tangled hair, freeing it of drops of melted snow, took off the jumper and laid it on a bench to dry, then turned her back on the stove and for the first time seemed to take full notice of Louisa's presence. Louisa was not quick enough to veil the look of pity she had held for the girl's wet hair and her legs bare and spotted blue with the cold. "I ain't generally so cold-natured," she said, as if apologizing for any troubled thoughts she might cause others. "I been a-settin' in the brash a long spell a-waitin'." "You were expecting someone?" Louisa asked. "No'm, not that. I was a-waitin' for the school to break." "But they might be glad to see you, Samantha T. Why, we even had a tree and presents on the Christmas tree for you and Tony. Mrs. Corey Cow herself said that the children shouldn't have run away when you came to gather holly, and she hoped you would come," Louisa told her, and spoke the truth. Corey's Christmas spirit had overflowed and flooded half the valley. "It ain't that, and it is too. I can't be taking no present from none. Mrs. Gosson, she bought me stockings, but I can't wear 'em." "You ought to wear the stockings," Louisa said. "I'm sure the woman must feel bad that you don't. Is Miss Goldstein a neighbor of yours?" She knew she ought to change the topic of conversation, but she had thought so much on the stony-eyed woman she had met by the graveyard. "Ain't Corey never told ye?" Samantha T. asked without looking at her. "No." "She's a closed-mouthin', that Corey. Miss Goshen lives close to me and close to the Barnetts. Our holler runs into their holler. We all get along pretty peaceable, though." "Miss Golston seems like a woman who would hate quarrels and fighting." "Yes'm, Molly Gosson hates it all. She takes everything to heart so. I think you could help her, teacher." Louisa disregarded the last remark. "Have some candy," she said. "We still have some left from Christmas." Samantha T. took a bright red piece, but only held it in her hand. She did not want the interruption. "Teacher, I'm a-tryin' again. I reckon you know that." "Yes, I know," Louisa said, feeling suddenly tired and defenseless in the face of her own growing uneasiness and the girl's stubborn insistence. "Would you listen now?" "It wouldn't do any good. I couldn't tell." "But would you listen? Let Molly Gosson talk." "I might, but it wouldn't help. Chris won't—" She stopped. No need to go over with her tongue what she had long worn out in her mind. "That ain't it," Samantha T. said. "I reckon Miss Gosson knows that Chris, he won't go away, and that ye dassn't tell Lee Buck nothing, but all the same she wants to talk." "Why?" "To ease her mind. Say you'll let her come and see you, teacher, just once. Pretty soon you'll be a-going away, you'll be off, and it won't matter, but she could tell you." "It wouldn't help her none," she says. "She wants somebody to know what she knows. She's sick in her mind, teacher. Not like Aunt Elgie, I don't mean that, but something else." Louisa got up and went to the back of the room for a drink of water and returned with an untasted cupful in her hand. "Tell her to come," she said, speaking slowly, and knowing as she spoke that she did not want to know anything the woman might have to tell. If only she could get Chris to go away, all the way away, out of the hills and into some northern town. Samantha T. showed no exultation. She seemed to pity Teacher. "When can I tell her to come? Some evening after school?" Louisa thought a moment. 2 weeks from Friday. Corey and Lee Buck are having a music party that night. The children will want to go home early, and I will stay and work on my records. "And I'll stand outside and watch," Samantha T. said, and pulled on the jumper. "But I do wish you wouldn't wait so long." "I can't make it any sooner. Won't you stay and visit school a while?" "No'm," she said, moving toward the door. "Better come and go along home with me, Teacher." "I couldn't today. You better stay longer until it stops snowing anyway." "Can't, Teacher." "Come again then. I'll be looking for you." "Oh, I'll be back, Teacher." "Goodbye." "Goodbye, Teacher." She opened the door, glanced out, saw no one there, and turned quickly to Louisa. "I might nigh forgot. Miss Gosson, she asked me to ask ye how was Corey's young'uns. Her babies are always awful croupy, and Miss Gosson, she wants to know, was Beady all right?" "Why, yes, Beetle's all right. Does this Miss Golston know?" But Samantha T. was out the door and away, not down the road, but through the trees. Louisa said nothing to all of the children of Samantha T.'s visit, but late that afternoon, while she sat and watched Corey at the churning in the big house by the fire, she told her. Said only that the girl had dropped in for a few moments to see her. Corey showed neither surprise nor curiosity. "Ye had ought to got her to stayed in out of the cold a while. Poor thing, half naked, I reckon." "Yes, I've told her lots of times that the children wouldn't mind if she visited the school, but she went away before they came." "Poor thing," Corey said again. "Some critters has it awful hard." "Yes, but Samantha T. never seems to think she has a hard time. She even asked about Beetle, said that she was afraid she might be croupy." It was hard not to mention the Golston woman. Corey had said she's no neighbor of mine, yet now the woman asked about her children. Corey gave her a quick appraising glance. "Samantha T. by herself, you say?" "Yes, she just asked about the baby as she was leaving." "It is hard weather on little young'uns," Corey said, smoothing one worn copper band of the red cedar churn. "Samantha T., I reckon she knows some of my babies has been croupy. My Corey, she'd be 10 now, died with something like croup when she was 2, a-going on 3. "I suppose getting a doctor here is hard," Louisa said after a time. Corey nodded and lifted the churn dasher gently up and down, looking into the fire as if her 3 dead babies moved there somewhere back of the reddening flames. "It weren't Lee Buck's fault. There's no God willing 'bout him. He was indicated then, and couldn't get out of the valley hisself, but he sent a man with the money in his hand. The doctor couldn't come. It was a snowy time, something like this. The snow was deeper. I recollect the way it looked on the firewood when the men 'ud bring it in. I couldn't get out of the house to see." "Were you sick too?" Corey lowered her voice. "I was in the family way," she whispered, "about 8 months. When Corey died, the baby come too soon. It lived a little while, a little boy, red hair, and the longest lashes, Teacher." You went through all that without a doctor?" "Yes. Lee Buck had every granny woman in the country. Lee Buck ain't no Brander Meese, though." "Won't Brander have a doctor for his family?" "Law, no. He's powerful religious, is Brander. He says everything is God's will. I don't hold by such, not plain blank, if I am a church member." Corey said no more and churned again, but in a half-hearted fashion, different from the usual brisk spat-spat she made with the churn dasher when she put her mind to the task. "Women folks has got it awful hard," she said after a time. "I kind o' wish I could see that poor Samantha T. She's been a-bearing a grown woman's load since she was just a young'un." "I imagine so," Louisa said, and glanced out the window. It would be a long while till supper. She wished Chris were about. They could play checkers, and maybe he would laugh a little, and she could forget that he was different from other men. Forget, too, the promise she had made Samantha T. She hoped the woman wouldn't come. She with her sorrows and her tales and her half-sick mind. Samantha T. was right. In a month she would be gone. She ought to start packing now. "I think I'll go upstairs," she said. "I wouldn't stay too long," Corey said, "and maybe catch cold. I've had a fire up there all day, but I can't get it warm." "It'll be all right," Louisa told her, and went slowly up the stair hole. She glanced about the room. So many things, silly, childish things that she had not brought to Cow Valley. From a miscellany of things on the mantel, she took 3 hickory nuts and held them in her hand and looked at them. Forgetful of the cold and the many other things that ought to be packed, she stood in idleness and remembered Lander when he gave her the nuts and the other children crowding about to see. They had come all the way from Cumberland Falls, he had said, and were much larger than any he had ever seen, so "I 'lowed you might like 'em, teacher." She stood and wondered what to do with them, and all the other things her people had given her. Aunt Haley's red stocking cap, 3 walnuts Lee Buck had carved into baskets for her, arrowheads and strange stones the children had found, and the Christmas presents she had received. She was silly, she told herself. A sensible person, that is a chemist with her mind on the future, would put the whole business in the corner and leave it for them to find when she was gone. "In 4 weeks I'll be gone," she half whispered, and though all the afternoon the thought had lain topmost in her mind, the whispered words startled her. It seemed such a short time since she had said, "In 7 months it will all be over. I can stand anything for 7 months." She remembered last summer when the agency notified her of the job, how fiercely she had said, "This is not my life, only something I must do before preparing for my life." She stood staring down at a tobacco sack pincushion and realized for the first time, perhaps, that for 20 years she had lived, and during at least 6 of those years she had comforted herself with that hard whisper, "I shall not always live like this. I am only preparing now. Someday I shall be happier." Since the beginning of adolescence she had unconsciously at first possessed a rare objectivity. She could see herself and reason with herself, be conscious of her weakness and her strength. After the 2nd year of high school, she had known her goal and saw it and walked toward it, secure of her road and her power to go where she would. She knew now that through the winter she had wavered. She had sometimes failed in being an aloof bystander and had felt things that she had no right to feel. But still, she told herself, she loved her own work and her other life and thought most of it. She walked to a corner of the room and looked at a little stack of books there. She took them one by one and slowly turned pages she had not touched in months. When she left Lexington, she had packed those books reverently almost, tearfully comforting herself with plans for studying them nights and weekends. They were to make her exile in the new world where a sudden lack of money forced her a less burdensome thing. She would, she had thought, through a continuation of her studies, preserve her identity as a student and save herself from the mental grubbiness that seemed to cling to the few country teachers she had met on the campus. In other days she had pitied, and in her secret soul scorned, those poorly dressed young women who came to college in February after a 7-month struggle with poverty and ignorance in some of Kentucky's poorer hill communities. She remembered bits of conversation overheard between 2 such in her advanced German class last year. She felt guilty now in remembering the smugness of her attitude toward them. Though not of the dullest, they were far from ranking among the little group of the brilliant ones to which Louisa belonged, not through lack of intellect, but rather she had felt at the time because of their foolish inability to put their trivial teaching lives behind them. She recalled how one, no longer young, and evidently the teacher of a one-room school, had one day brought to class so that the other might see some pictures cut from the New York Times. Together they had looked at the scene from the Dublin Horse Show and exclaimed over them. Not their beauty, she could have forgiven that, but of the use they would be in their geography teaching. She could not tolerate that, and had pitied the women because they insisted on thinking of their petty work, while Dr. Friedstein of Berlin and the Sorbonne lectured in his faultless German. Now she hoped to see those women in the spring, Miss Weaver and Miss Newell. She would talk with them. Had they ever, she wondered, used a Sears Roebuck catalog as a textbook in geography, and the order blanks in the back as the basis for fascinating problems in arithmetic, and the section devoted to radios and electrical appliances as an encyclopedia eagerly read by children who had never seen a radio or an electric iron or an oil stove or a magazine? Maybe they had done that and other things she had never thought of. They would understand her pride if she couldn't herself. It was growing dark in the corner by the books and cold. The discomfort of it roused her from her thoughts, and first lighting the lamp, she went to sit by the fire and toast her shins while thumbing a calculus in the hope that she might not have forgotten so much after all. She turned pages, stopped and read without comprehending that the study of exponential trigonometric integrals began with the equation. She went no further. Disgusted, she closed the book and stared into the red flames of the fire, trying to think what she had done with her spare time of 7 months, time she had dedicated to the books. A chunk of burning oak dissolved into a mass of red coals, filmed by a thin wavering of blue flames. In the red cavern of the fire, she saw her time. Long evenings of sitting in the big house with Lee Buck while he yarned or played his fiddle. Bright Saturdays, squirrel and rabbit hunting over the hills with Chris and the children. Sundays, visiting the neighbors with Corey, Mrs. Hayes' cows' crackling bread, and Mrs. Pomp's wild strawberry jam. Evenings of possum hunting in the rainy moonlight. Other nights of stars and church going, of cold and sitting by the fire and helping Corey quilt piece, of shelling corn. There was still a blister from the last time. She saw the pictures of her time, felt them, heard them, the rustle of leaves, thud of a mule's feet under her, shouting of preachers, cry of beetle, warm feel of the baby's head against her shoulder, the hardness of Chris's hands when he took her from a mule, and perhaps these things were brighter than any she had found in books. The feeling of guilt that she might have had a year ago was lacking now. She had spent her time and it was gone, and she regretted nothing. By all the standards she had set for herself, she should at the moment, she thought, be promising herself long hours with the books and vowing to make amends for her shameful waste of time. Yet she promised nothing. She would study as she had always studied and win the scholarship she had to win in order to remain in school next year, but something had gone from her. She wondered if it could be ambition. It was not, she decided, that her ambition was dying. It was only that the thing desired seemed less desirable. She liked to do the things she had been doing here too well. Some weakness in her let a little doubt touch her for a moment. Had she ever liked books and study so much? Was it only that she had liked the people back there less, and could it be that the years of intensive study behind her and the other years waiting were but a road leading away from something and not a broad avenue into life? The thought held her tense for a moment, but only for a moment. If she let herself think such things, she would be defeated without beginning. Someone knocked on her stair door, and she called, "Come up!" It was Rye with Beetle on her hip. "Teacher, you'll get cold a-sittin'," she said. "This fire's no good." and she slid Beetle to the hearth and busied herself with poker and shovel and pieces of fat pine, then went downstairs for pieces of dry sugar tree from the kitchen wood box. "How come you're a-sitting up here all by yourself and not writing letters or nothing?" she asked when the fire was burning to her satisfaction. Louisa busied herself with straightening one of Beetle's stockings. "I came, you see, it's time for me to start packing." She wished Rye wouldn't look at her like that. Anyone must know that she had to pack sometime. Rye swallowed hard. "You packing all your things, teacher?" "Yes, all of them." Rye was silent then and seated herself on the floor by the hearth with Beetle and watched the fire and looked at Louisa's things all hung about the room. "Ain't long now," she said, after a time, and with a sudden choking sigh. "No, it isn't," Louisa answered, hating some irresistible force that impelled her to show of sprightly vivacity when the girl sat before her silent and stricken. "I'd think you would be glad to be out of school," she said. "I won't," Rye answered. "I like school. When it's out, it'll be grubbing time and then corn planting. That will be hard, but I thought you liked to work outside." "It ain't so bad. That is, it won't be if'n we know you'll be back." Rye looked at her, trouble for the answer to her implied question written large in her eyes. She wished she could lie, say glib, bright things about how soon she would be back, and writing every week, but she could not. Rye did not seem a child to be soothed by pleasant promises, but a person old as herself, older in many ways, who must be given a truthful answer to a sensible question. For a moment she wished she might make those promises, wished it until she remembered Chris. If she came back again and he were here, she might not go back. For once she could not gauge her strength. Looking at the girl, she noticed how she had grown during the winter. Breasts had appeared on her childish narrow chest, and some soft sadness in her eyes betokened the approach of womanhood. In 3 years she would be almost 16, married in all probability, preparing for the birth of a child without doctor or nurse. In 3 years she herself would still be going to school, preparing for life, while this child stepped deeply into it. A life of fulfilling the biological pattern cut out for all things that were female and defenseless against ignorance and poverty and pain. She thought of the woman by the fence among the cedar trees. Life might do that to Rye. Bitterness and fear and love might warp her and twist her until she became like a walking stone. Rye would have lived. She would never live. The things the woman had felt and Rye might feel, she would never know. She would escape it all by being civilized and going away. If she could say yes to Rye, she might live herself and taste most of what any life had to offer, everything except happiness and success and comfort, and they were but the tinsel that made existence glitter for some, not life itself. Rye did not press her for an answer, but continued to sit on the floor, her head bent forward on her drawn-up knees. She had read Teacher's silence, and now a lie was useless. Louisa pretended not to notice while she furtively dabbed her eyes with a dress sleeve. Comfort was out of the question. The only comfort the child would have was something the woman would not give. She felt small and guilty, but at the same time angry with a world that crept on her softly like a thief, touched her in tender places, and then asked her for the only important thing she had, herself. She was glad when Rye haltingly remarked that she must be going, took Beetle from a pile of unpacked shoes, and groped her way down the dark stair-hole. When the child had gone, she sat a long time trying to justify herself to herself. Many things were in favor of the self she had thought she wanted to be. She had a mind fit for the work she had planned. She knew that without being an egotist. She was not fitted for a life here in the hills. She had done her share. Her patrons agreed that she had taught the best school Cow Valley had ever known, the highest attendance, the only teacher who had taught the whole term, and who had not had a falling out with some parent. If she came here again to teach and made of herself a teacher and nothing more, all the years spent in preparation for something else would be wasted. She could forget them all when she was gone, Chris as well. She would not make their trouble her trouble. She would only listen to the Golston woman because she pitied her so. The things the woman had to tell might trouble her, but not for long. Corey's "Supper's on, teacher," aroused her from her self-trial, and she went downstairs and there secretly belittled the whole business, for Rye was a child again, quarreling with Pete, who wished to name the new calf at the barn Sparkler. It was a girl calf, his sister said, and was to be called Louisa. During supper, Corey stood by the stove and made plans for the coming music party. The Meese boys were coming with a guitar and a banjo, and Lucy Dykes had promised to get her cousin from across Cumberland. He was a mighty one on the French harp, but Herb Cal might not like it now. He might think they were tired of his French harping. Well, another interesting, very sad though chapter. So sad, all the thoughts of Louisa. Before we talk about that, a couple of things that jumped out at me. In the very beginning, when Corey's talking about poor Samantha T, that word usage is still, I say that all the time. If I hear about somebody that's going through a hard time, I'll say, poor so-and-so, I feel so bad for them. I might even, it can be said seriously like that, and I might even say it teasingly to one of the girls. If they, they're trying to hurry and they spill something, I might say, "You poor thing, let me help you." And I'm really just kind of teasing them, more than I'm actually feeling sorry for them. But that usage, using poor in that manner to talk about someone who's really down on their luck or kind of just struggling a little bit, like when I would use it in a teasing manner, like I said with Corey and Katie. I also like the part where Corey, again, where she's telling teacher, don't stay up there too long up in the loft because I can't get it warm up there and you might catch cold. Granny's always worrying about us catching cold. You can't wash your hair and go outside, you might catch cold. You can't go outside too early in the spring barefooted or you might catch cold. So that one's really, both of those really jumped out at me that are still common here today. And while growing up, it's funny, like, thinking about Granny saying that about you might catch cold, if you're out there barefooted or whatever. I laughed at her and said, that's not how you catch colds or whatever. But then as an adult, I find myself thinking kind of the same things Granny does, over the years. So it's just an interesting phenomenon that happens sometimes when you hear those things enough. Then even though you don't believe them, then you kind of start following them too. So I liked that part. Overall, the whole chapter is about Louisa really still questioning herself. She wants to go back to that beautiful dream of being a chemist in that life that she left. That's what she's supposed to want, right? That's what she's worked for all her life. That's where she's worked to get. But now she's stayed with these people, and they've touched her in so many different ways. They've been so good to her. And while she don't understand them, and she sees part of their ignorance, she also respects them and sees part of their strength and their brilliance and the way they live their life and the way they work together and the things they do and how they provide for each other. And she's really mesmerized by all that and really just touched by the way they've treated her. So she's kind of weighing those options. And right now, of course, it sounds like she's saying, I can't give up my other dream, even though it doesn't mean as much to me now that I've been with these people. So you can really see her struggling with that. And it is an interesting thing. Lots of us go through that. You've had this one dream and you kind of get close to it, and all of a sudden you find out it's actually not what you wanted after all, one of those things. So it's a really interesting, common, I would say, occurrence that happens to us human beings as we live our lives. But I hope you'll leave a comment and let me know what jumped out at you from this chapter. And as always, I hope you'll keep dropping back by. We've got to find out what happens next to Louisa in Mountain Path.